Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hi everyone.
With plenty to talk about this week, let's dive straight in. What have you got first for us, Dennis?
Well, Helen, housing is front and centre of a controversial proposal from Boris Johnson to extend the right to buy to housing association tenants. Seeking to bolster his weakened premiership, the Prime Minister has chosen to reheat a previously ditched plan that has been universally derided. Here's the story. It is with some curiosity that I now report that the government is proposing to resurrect the right to buy for tenants in housing association properties, allowing tenants to buy their social properties at discounts of up to 70% of the market price. Now, this rehashing of one of Margaret Thatcher's flagship policies originally formed part of the controversial Housing and Planning Act introduced by the Conservatives in their 2015 general election manifesto. It was sidelined in 2016 by Theresa May, who favoured a more balanced approach to the question of housing supply. The paucity of detail in the current announcement suggests that it is still at the drawing board stage, and commentators all agree the policy should stay there. There are a number of problems with the policy itself. But first, why does this proposal matter to us? Well, first, it will lead to a greater loss of social housing for rent. It will do nothing but worsen the current huge homelessness crisis, and all of the adverse social consequences will fall upon councils to sort out. Now let's look at the main concerns. First, housing associations are independent, mainly charitable organisations that were established only to provide affordable homes for those on low incomes. Second, where does this all fit into levelling up? Housing commentators say that it is hard to think of a more inequitable policy for a government committed to levelling up across the country. The funding of discounts for tenants is bound to come at the cost of genuine affordable housing provision. Finally, with the current desperate need for more genuinely affordable rental housing, the government's priority should be on reversing the long-term net loss of social housing, not adding to it. When the 2015 right to buy policy was announced, the then Mayor of London said that extending right to buy to housing associations would be the height of insanity. That mayor was Boris Johnson.
Now, taken from the LGA Bulletin, in a debate on the role of neighbourhood plans in planning policy, James Gray MP voiced his concerns that neighbourhood plans were only valid for 2 years and proposed that they remain valid for a greater length of time or until local people chose to amend them. Anthony Mangel MP urged central government to provide resources to assist people developing neighbourhood plans to avoid extra burdens being placed on councils. He said the need for this was often seen when planning disputes found in favour of property developers, who are much better resourced and can override a neighbourhood's priorities. He urged the Secretary of State to halt proposals in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill to allow neighbourhood plans to be overridden, as this would kill faith in the system. Shadow Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook MP said greater clarity is needed on where authority lies on the final decision on neighbourhood plans. For example, what would happen in instances where a plan is in conflict with national planning policy? He also noted that more action is needed to engage communities in areas of deprivation in the drawing up of these plans. Responding for the government's Housing Minister Stuart Andrew MP said that the government's vision is for neighbourhood plans to become a part of the planning system, ensuring they cannot be ignored by central government. In related news, councils are being blocked from approving the building of 20,000 new homes a year by rules designed to clean up river pollution, according to LGA analysis. Over 7% of all of England's planned housing building schemes cannot go ahead due to high levels of nutrient pollution in nearby waterways. The LGA said the situation was concerning and frustrating for councils charged with increasing the supply of affordable housing. Dennis, I understand that Lord Evans has commented upon the latest review of the ministerial code. What's the latest?
Helen, the Prime Minister's advisor on ethics resigned last week, as you know, leaving many unanswered questions. But surely part of his reasoning is linked to our next piece. Lord Evans' response to the recent unsatisfactory review of the Ministerial Code highlighted the overriding importance of independence in the investigation of breaches of that code by ministers. Here, I look at what the lessons might be for us too. Standards Committee Chair Lord Evans has expressed serious concerns about the outcome of the latest government review of the Ministerial Code. In particular, under new rules, the Prime Minister's advisor can now initiate his own investigations, only having first consulted the Prime Minister and obtained his consent. Lord Guy's sudden departure must not overshadow this key issue. Lord Evans says that he agrees with Lord Guyte that the report's conclusion represents a low level of ambition on standards and ethics. Lord Guyte said that the independent advisor should be able to independently initiate investigations and determine breaches without reference to the Prime Minister. Lord Evans wrote to the government saying that a system where the independent advisor still requires the Prime Minister's permission to launch an investigation will not restore public trust in ethical standards at the heart of government. Instead, suspicion about the way in which the Ministerial Code is administered will linger. Now, the need for independence in these matters and the need to constantly ensure independence in member investigations is essential to maintain trust and confidence in our standards processes too. In our sector, the monitoring officer, save in very exceptional circumstances, is appointed, employed, and their prospects determined by the council whose members might be investigated by them. The monitoring officer will usually be one of the most senior lawyers working regularly with the executive members of the council. And the chief executive, of course, exercises virtually unbridled power over staffing and structures. The potential scope for unseen pressures and influence, therefore, is self-evident. My point is this: be aware of how things look and take steps to dispel any impression that your actions might not appear to be independent. That's how to maintain the trust of others. This is a lesson government has again chosen to ignore, but we can be and are better than that. Now, I was going to leave it there, but there's a postscript to this item which leads us back to the Prime Minister. He has now decided to review whether he needs an ethics advisor at all. You really can't make this up.
A case of interest to many employers now concerning workers returning to work due to COVID-19 and isolation concerns, which played out at the Employment Appeals Tribunal in the matter of Rogers and Leeds Laser Cutting Limited. Mr. Rogers had not worked for Leeds Laser Cutting for 2 years, so this case centred on automatic unfair dismissal, which does not require the 2 years qualifying period. It's neatly outlined in the local government lawyer, but the essence of the case was that Mr. Rogers emailed the company on the 27th of March 2020 at the start of the lockdown and advised he could not return to work due to his isolating vulnerable children. The company did not agree, and they put measures in place which were compliant with health and safety guidance to enable him to return to work. They subsequently dismissed him because of his failure to come back. Mr. Rogers issued a claim for automatic unfair dismissal, suggesting he had to protect himself from circumstances of danger, which he reasonably believed were serious and imminent, and which he could not have been expected to avoid. This period of time was, you'll recall, an extremely frantic period, and many people were very afraid. And indeed, the government was sending out letters warning those classed as vulnerable to isolate and take extra precautions during the pandemic. However, in this case, Mr. Rogers during this time had driven a friend to the hospital, worked at a pub during the pandemic, and expressed no reservations about commuting to and from work. And the Employment Tribunal concluded he had not been dismissed for health and safety reasons, finding whilst Mr. Rogers had general concerns about COVID-19, he did not have the requisite belief of a serious and imminent danger in his workplace, but rather a general concern about the prevalence of the virus in society at large. On appeal, and importantly for employers, the Employment Appeal Tribunal accepted, in principle, that an employee could reasonably believe there were circumstances of serious and imminent danger arising within the workplace that prevented him or her from returning to work. However, in this case, the workplace posed no greater a risk than general society, and nor were there dangerous, serious or imminent circumstances. Further, Mr. Rogers could have been expected to take reasonable steps to avoid such danger, such as wearing a mask and social distancing. Now, Dennis, last week I raised the findings of an all-parliamentary group on the impact of the executive on the judiciary, and our president gave a statement on the comments of the Prime Minister in respect of lawyers. Politicisation of key legal roles in Parliament is a growing concern. What's your view on this?
Well, Helen, this is a much bigger issue, I think, that's taking us into questions about the government's relationship to the rule of law. Here's my story. A couple of weeks ago, I was at LLG's spring conference in Durham, and I got talking to one of our regular presenters on standards and ethics. There was much we both agreed upon about the current state of political engagement. Since Brexit, politics have become more intolerant and generally more toxic. Opinion is often irreparably polarised. Debate and discussion is characterised by anger, by prejudice, and by the inability to disagree without falling out. The establishment, too, is not all that it was either. No surprise, then, that the offices of Lord Chancellor and the Attorney General have been described as politicised by an all-party parliamentary group on democracy and the Constitution. They concluded their report with a strong warning about political threats to judicial independence. Now, the MP group found that in recent years, law ministers, including the Lord Chancellor, have no longer even seen their only priority as defending the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary. In their view, they now actively promote government interests. In their report, the group further say this attitude has included turning a blind eye to accusations of the enemy within, or even to encourage doubt in the impartiality of our judges, which risks undermining public confidence in the law itself. Ministers are accused of neglecting their traditional constitutional role by making public statements which misrepresent judicial decisions and by responding to adverse decisions with threats to reform the judiciary. The independence of the judiciary was once considered inviolable, but not anymore. The prorogation challenge, the numerous cases concerning Brexit and also the pandemic have exposed yet further cracks in the cornerstones of our constitution and our democracy and the separation of powers that underpins it. I made the point earlier in relation to standards and behaviour at both ministerial and at local level that the golden thread that runs through our political, justice and ethical systems is the need for independence. This thread is part of the rule of law, and commentators are examining already the acceptance of the rule of law in our post-Brexit political environment. But the problem is that the rule of law is such a basic right that we all take it for granted. At its heart is the notion, spelled out in Magna Carta in 1215, that even those in power do not enjoy unlimited and unfettered authority, but are constrained by legal rules. In effect, even the state, and yes, the Prime Minister, are subject to the law of the land too.
Now, to round off, I thought I would take a look at the current work streams of the Solicitors Regulation Authority and what our solicitor membership might need to be aware of. Currently, the SRA are consulting on their business plan for 2022-23, which outlines their planned activities for the year ahead, including how they intend to allocate their budget, what this means for the practicing certificate fee, and also compensation fund contributions. The SRA are also consulting on when it publishes details of decisions against solicitors so that the public and employers can find out about any misconduct or concerns to ensure that this is done in a fair and proportionate way. The SRA have also announced how it intends to move forward with plans to update its issuing of financial penalties to law firms and solicitors who fall short of expected professional standards. This includes an increase of the maximum fine from £2,000 to £25,000. Finally, the SRA have identified a list of signpost resources to help lawyers make adjustments if they are struggling due to the demands and pressures of a professional life. All these items are available on the SRA website at sra.org.uk. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 22, available now on the LLG website. So it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me too.
Thank you for listening. Have a good week.